Well, good morning. Welcome back to GP Outdoors. Today I'm going to do, I believe, the fourth video in a series on buying your first property or your first cottage. And the topic of today's video is going to be road allowances or right-of-ways. If you're currently looking at a property or you've just recently purchased a property, take a look at that survey. And if you see a road allowance or an easement or a right-of-way, as they're very commonly called, I hope you'll stick around. Cheers. I was inspired to do the video today because I was watching one of my favorite YouTube channels. I watch from time to time, and this gentleman has property in Ontario, and his survey had a road allowance on it. And like most people who buy property, they probably think that it'll never ever come to light that somebody's going to blow a road through that forest. Well, they did. Let me tell you a few things about buying property that has either an easement, a road allowance, or some kind of right-of-way through it, or that you need to access in order to get to the property you wish to purchase. Let's begin with a little bit of context. If you're new to the channel, the property that I own up here on the lake is about 4 acres. It's not a huge property, but it's a great size for me. However, I'm almost a full mile away from the nearest municipal road. And like so many other properties in this area and other areas of Ontario, in order to get to my piece of property, I have a mile-long drive through somebody else's property in order to get to mine. In fact, in Ontario here, in many rural areas, especially cottage areas like here, northwest of me, far north of me, many or a very large portion of properties that are up for sale or that you could purchase require you to either allow people through your property or you need access through somebody else's property to get to yours. Very common. Okay, it's pretty common. So what's the big deal? What I found out though is that although it's very common for people to have to pass through somebody else's land to get to their parcel, it's also just as common that most cases there's no deeded access to go through that person's property. And that's the point of today's video. We're going to talk about two scenarios. We're going to talk about a scenario where you're purchasing a piece of property that requires you to pass through somebody else's to get to your property. And then I also want to talk about you purchasing a property in which you have a right-of-way or a road allowance, which allows others or third parties to pass through your property. Let's begin. A very common scenario that occurs is maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, somebody's great-great-great-great-grandfather owned a parcel of land. Neighbor moves in next door and says, hey, I can't access my land unless I can go through yours. Is it okay to pass through your land? He said, sure. Just, stay to that south boundary, maybe throw some gravel down to get you there through the muddy seasons. And over decades, more parcels of land started to get severed. More people started to pass through until one day somebody realizes that there's actually no legal deeded allowance to go through that gentleman's land. So you go to purchase a piece of property, you get your land, you're passing through that gentleman's land, and one day, whoever now owns the land, somebody says, I don't want to see that traffic anymore, or I want to build on that part of my property, and I don't want anybody passing through anymore. Or maybe there's just simply a dispute between neighbors, and the one neighbor tries to cut access off. I'm not saying whether they can legally or not. I'm not a lawyer, and as the old saying goes, for every argument, there's a lawyer willing to make it. That's not the point of the story. The point is, when you purchase property, you're going to see that land survey as you sit down with your lawyer when you're trying to close the transaction or you're considering the transaction, more importantly. And you may see that there is what sometimes is called a road allowance, or you'll see a right-of-way or an easement. There's a number of different types of accesses. If you're in a position where you're buying a piece of property that requires you to pass through somebody else's, you have got to confirm with the lawyer that there is a right-of-way that's papered and deeded to your land to ensure that you have a legal right to access whatever strip of that other person's property. Without it, you have an unsure access to your property and probably a whole lot of problems coming in the future. What's just as important is you need to understand from your lawyer whether there are any restrictions or conditions on that access, because those restrictions or conditions can make or break the deal for you. In my case here, I have a fully open, unconditioned, unrestricted access, which means I can access that driveway anytime I want, and that was the reason why I purchased this property. If there had been conditions or restrictions on it, I probably would have thought twice, depending on what those were. But you've got to make sure you understand not only the restrictions and conditions that are along with that deeded access, but what your rights, obligations, and liabilities are as it pertains to passing through that portion of somebody else's property. So at the end of the day, when you're looking to buy that property, make sure your lawyer does his diligence, ask a whole lot of questions. Make sure you understand what you can and cannot do, what your obligations are, your liabilities, and of course your rights. But you also need to ask the lawyer what the rights, obligations, and liabilities are of the person's land that you're traversing. You need to be fully aware of what you're about to commit to before you sign that document. You're spending a lot of money. It's highly probable that at some point in the future, you're going to find yourself in a disagreement or discussion with that neighbor over something that's going on or your access to that right of way, and you need to be fully briefed and aware of what your rights and what their rights are to help you get through that debate or that disagreement. And now the other side of the coin. You're purchasing a piece of property that has either a road allowance or a right of way through that property, allowing other people to pass through. Once again, you need to understand what it means to you, what rights, obligations, liabilities, and what types of things you have to allow other people to be able to do on your property before you purchase the property. What's really important is if you are considering that property that has the road allowance or those right-of-ways through it, you need to get your lawyer to do a search to find out who else in the community or down the road also has access through those portions of your property. Most people don't realize that when you buy a piece of property that shows that right-of-way or that possible road allowance, it means that there are other people in the area or the community that also have property that has deeded access through your property. So you need to get your lawyer to do a search to find out who else or how many people actually have access through your right-of-way, because it's not on your survey. For example, I'm here on the lake. I have a deeded access through somebody else's land to get to the road, but I also have a deeded access through a right-of-way on somebody else's property north of the road to get to the next lake. Fully deeded to my property, which means I can pass through my neighbor's property. I can also cross the road, go down a bit, and I can pass through somebody else's property, unfettered and unrestricted, to access the other lake. And here's the big caution. If you don't want to buy property that allows third parties to get through any piece of it or any swath of it, don't buy the property. Because I think, as my lawyer had told me at the time, a lot of people assume that even though there's right-of-ways or there's road allowances or easements, etc., that it's highly unlikely anybody's going to use them. Not true, just as we found out this week on the other YouTube channel. It exists there. And if you don't want people close to you, or you don't want a road through the side of your property or an easement or right-of-way that allows third parties to pass through your property, don't buy the property. Because at the end of the day, even if people are not doing it today, it doesn't mean a month from now or a year from now, somebody's not going to start egressing your property, or the municipality is not going to come out, start surveying that road allowance and start cutting trees. You have to consider that. You can't hope that it's never going to get used if it's that important to you. If you don't mind people passing through, the side of your property, or you don't mind a road being where it's shown on the survey, then you're totally in good shape. But make sure you consider it, because once you buy the property, you can't stop it, especially if it's deeded to other people. And trust me, if that property you want to buy has a right-of-way going through it, you'll be shocked at the obligations and liabilities that come along with having that right-of-way through your property. Ask your lawyer before you buy the property. I hope today's video was helpful if you are looking for property or looking to buy that first cabin or cottage. If you like the channel, please click subscribe, hit the like button, and if you want to know when I'm posting videos, just click that little bell. Have a wonderful and safe week with your families. Be kind to one another, and I'll see you again on the next one. Cheers.